Out of jealousy, my sister hired a lawyer to declare me bankrupt until the judge ruled. My jealous younger sister looked straight at me in the middle of the crowded courtroom and said, "Prepare yourself for public humiliation." She laughed triumphantly, then added, "I want to see your face when you fail." I sat there in complete silence as the tension grew thick enough to choke on. My parents grinned with pure satisfaction beside her. The packed federal courtroom in downtown Chicago buzzed with reporters scribbling notes and camera flashes popping non-stop. I, Brianna Bennett, 34 years old, sat at the defendant's table with my hands steady on the cool wooden surface. Even as adrenaline surged through me, this wasn't just any bankruptcy hearing. It was a public spectacle my own family had carefully orchestrated to tear down everything I had built. My company, Stay AI, had become one of the fastest-growing names in hotel technology right here in Chicago. But none of that mattered to them. All they saw was my success, and it ate at them. 2 weeks earlier, everything had started at a family dinner. The kind of dinner where old resentments finally spilled out into the open. My sister couldn't hide her jealousy anymore, and my parents backed her without hesitation. Only one person in that room tried to calm things down, but none of us knew that single dinner would lead straight to this courtroom, and none of us expected the judge to pause, look up from his notes, and ask one single question that would change everything. 2 weeks later, I was back at my desk on the 23rd floor of the downtown Chicago tower that housed Stay AI. The afternoon sun cut across the monitors as I reviewed the latest integration reports from our hotel partners. My phone vibrated on the glass surface. The head of security was calling, voice tight. "Brianna, we need you in the monitoring room right now. It's about Ryan Matthews." I walked quickly through the open plan office, nodding at developers who glanced up from their keyboards. In the secure room, 3 screens showed email threads and chat logs. Ryan Matthews, one of my mid-level project managers, had been meeting someone outside the building. The security team had flagged unusual activity after Ryan accessed restricted files about potential new contracts. That someone turned out to be Brandon Quinn. I recognized the name immediately, my sister's husband. The logs showed Brandon had approached Ryan at a networking event 2 months earlier, offering cash for inside information on Stay AI's pipeline. Ryan had taken the bait. Instead of confronting him right away, I decided to test how deep the betrayal went. I created a fake memo marked confidential about a supposed $200 million deal with a major hotel chain expanding across the Midwest. I planted the document in a shared drive that only a handful of people, including Ryan, could access. Then I waited. The next morning, Ryan forwarded the fake memo to an anonymous email address. Within hours, the same address received a wire transfer confirmation for $25,000 from an account linked to Brandon Quinn. The security team captured every keystroke and screenshot. I called Ryan into the large conference room on the executive floor. He walked in carrying his laptop, still wearing the company badge on his collared shirt. I closed the door and slid printed copies of the emails and bank records across the polished table. "Explain this," I said quietly. Ryan's face went pale. He stammered at first, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. He admitted Brandon had promised him a senior position at the family business if he helped gather damaging material. Ryan had passed along real client lists and projected revenue numbers. Believing my company was on shaky ground, he never expected the trap. I sat across from him without raising my voice. The shock hit me hard, someone I had mentored for 3 years selling me out for quick money. But I kept my breathing even and my hands still. Showing anger would only give them more ammunition later. I recorded the entire conversation with his permission after explaining it would protect the company, then asked him to leave the building immediately. HR would handle the formal termination by end of day. As soon as Ryan walked out, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. Valerie Hayes answered on the second ring. I gave her the short version: my brother-in-law had bribed an employee. They were clearly building a case against me, and I now had solid proof of corporate espionage. Valerie's tone sharpened. She told me to send every file immediately and said she would start drafting a defensive strategy. "This changes everything," she said. "They just handed us leverage." I forwarded the folder of evidence while still sitting in the now empty conference room. The city skyline stretched outside the windows, but my focus stayed narrow. The betrayal stung, yet it also clarified the situation. My own family wasn't just jealous anymore. They were actively trying to destroy what I had built. I saved the recordings to an encrypted drive and made a second copy for Valerie. By the time I left the office that evening, the sky had turned deep orange over Lake Michigan. I drove home through the evening traffic without turning on the radio. My mind kept replaying Ryan's nervous explanations and the transfer confirmation. The pieces were falling into place faster than I expected. Whatever my sister and her husband were planning, they had just made their first serious mistake. I arrived at my apartment, locked the door, and opened my laptop one more time to check that all files had reached Valerie safely. Her reply popped up within minutes. "Received. We're ready when they make their move." 1 month later, a registered letter from the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Northern District of Illinois arrived at my office. The thick envelope carried the federal seal and my name printed in bold letters. Inside was the formal notice that James Bennett and Logan Bennett had filed an involuntary bankruptcy petition against me. They accused me of owing $2.5 million that I had supposedly borrowed and never repaid. The document listed specific dates and amounts, claiming the debt came from business loans they had provided years earlier to help launch my company. The filing was already public record, and the court had scheduled an initial hearing for the following month. I read the pages twice, feeling the weight of the paper in my hands. This was no longer private family tension. It was now a public legal action designed to freeze my assets and damage my reputation across the industry. The filing would be published, and everyone in Chicago business circles would see it. I immediately called Valerie Hayes and asked her to come to the office as soon as possible. She arrived within the hour, carrying her briefcase and a notepad. We sat in the conference room and spread the court documents across the table. Valerie reviewed each page carefully, her expression growing more serious with every line. She explained that the petition was filed under Chapter 7 and that my father and sister were listed as the creditors. The allegations were detailed enough to force a hearing, but Valerie said we had strong grounds to challenge the legitimacy of the debt. She asked for any records I had from the early days of Luxday AI. I pulled up old contracts and bank statements on my laptop, showing that the initial funding had been my own savings and investments from angel backers, not family loans. As we went through the files, my mind drifted briefly to the pressure I had faced from my family in those early years. They had constantly questioned my decision to strike out on my own, pushing me to stay within the family business and contribute to their ventures instead. Every time I refused, the conversations turned cold, with comments about how ungrateful I was for the opportunities they offered. It was never alone. It was their way of trying to keep me under control. I shook the memory away and focused on the papers in front of us. Valerie pointed out inconsistencies in the petition. The dates they claimed for the loans didn't match any records, and the amounts were inflated. She said the evidence they had gathered through Ryan was circumstantial at best and could be countered with our documentation. We spent the next 2 hours compiling a response strategy. Valerie outlined the motion we would file to dismiss the petition, emphasizing that the debt was fabricated and the filing was made in bad faith. By the time we finished, the sun had shifted across the windows of the conference room. Valerie gathered her notes and promised to have the initial response drafted by the end of the week. She reminded me that this kind of filing could be dismissed quickly if we proved the claim was false, and that we had the upper hand with the evidence we already possessed. I walked her to the elevator and thanked her for coming on short notice. Back at my desk, I began organizing all the supporting documents into a single folder. I scanned every old email and contract, making sure nothing was missing. The process was methodical and gave me a sense of control amid the chaos. This wasn't just about defending my company. It was about proving that their attempt to pull me down would not succeed. I saved the folder to the secure drive and sent a copy to Valerie for her review. The preparation for the counter-filing was underway, and I knew we would be ready when the court date came. Later that evening, I left the office and drove toward my apartment on the north side of Chicago. Traffic moved slowly along Lakeshore Drive as the city lights began to reflect on the dark water. My hands rested on the steering wheel while my thoughts turned back to the beginning of everything. I remembered the exact day I left home 11 years ago. I was 22, standing in the driveway of my parents' house in the suburbs with 2 suitcases and the keys to an old Honda. My father had blocked the car, arms crossed, telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life by refusing to join the family business. My mother stood beside him, repeating that I owed them for the education and opportunities they had given me. My sister watched from the porch with a small smile, saying nothing but clearly enjoying the scene. Only Grandma Alice had come outside, placed a hand on my shoulder, and whispered that I should follow my own path. She slipped a small envelope with some cash into my jacket pocket and told me to call her when I got settled. That night, I drove straight to a cheap studio apartment near the university and started building LuxStay AI from scratch. I worked 2 jobs while coding the first version of the software in my spare time. My father called once a week at first, demanding I come home and contribute to their commercial real estate deals. My mother sent long messages about family loyalty and how selfish I was being. My sister occasionally texted sarcastic comments about my little tech dreams. Grandma Alice was the only one who asked how the work was going and encouraged me to keep pushing forward. The memories played clearly as I turned off the highway and entered my neighborhood. I pulled into the underground garage of my building, parked in my assigned spot, and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. The weight of those early years still felt familiar, but so did the determination that had carried me through them. I took the elevator up to my floor and unlocked the door to my apartment. The space was quiet and orderly, with large windows overlooking the skyline. I set my bag down and checked my phone. There was a missed call from Grandma Alice. I called her back immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm but concerned. She had heard rumors that my father and sister were taking some kind of legal action against me. I confirmed that papers had been filed but assured her I was handling it with my lawyer. Grandma Alice listened without interrupting, then simply said she believed in me and that I had proven them wrong once before. She reminded me that real family didn't try to tear each other down. Her words carried the same steady support she had given me the day I drove away from the house. We talked for nearly 20 minutes about small things: the weather in Chicago, her garden, and a new book she was reading. I didn't go into details about the court filing because I didn't want to worry her more than necessary. Before hanging up, she made me promise to visit her soon for coffee. Just the 2 of us. I ended the call and stood by the window, looking out at the lights of the city. The conversation with Grandma Alice settled something inside me. The pressure from the rest of my family had always been there, but her quiet confidence reminded me why I had chosen this path in the first place. I opened my laptop briefly to review a few notes, then closed it again. The past was clear in my mind now, and it only strengthened my resolve for whatever came next. The hearing date came in early January. I arrived at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago shortly after 9, the winter wind cutting through my coat as I climbed the steps. Security was tight, and the elevator ride to the 7th floor felt longer than usual. When I stepped into the courtroom, The space was already buzzing with quiet activity. Reporters occupied several rows in the gallery, their notebooks open and phones set to silent. A handful of industry contacts sat scattered among them, drawn by the public filing. I moved to the defense table and took my seat next to Valerie Hayes. She had her files arranged and offered a brief, confident nod. On the opposite side, my father, James Bennett, sat rigidly between my sister Logan Bennett and their attorney, Kevin Lawson. My mother, Betty Bennett, was positioned just behind them, her hands folded tightly in her lap and her expression carefully composed into one of worried disappointment. They kept their gazes forward, refusing to look in my direction as the clerk announced the case. Judge Harlan Reeves entered from the side door, and the entire room rose. He was a seasoned jurist with a direct manner and sharp attention to detail. After everyone was seated, he opened the proceedings and gave Kevin Lawson the floor for the petitioner's opening statement. Kevin Lawson stood, buttoning his suit jacket, and began laying out the case. He described the alleged unpaid loans in measured tones, claiming they had placed an unsustainable burden on the family and that my company's finances were collapsing. He spoke with practiced confidence, referencing documents and timelines that painted me as unreliable and evasive. Then Lawson called my sister to testify. Logan Bennett approached the witness stand with steady steps, adjusted the microphone, and turned her attention straight toward me. Her voice rang clear and steady through the courtroom speakers. "Prepare yourself for public humiliation," she said. She paused for effect, then let out a short, triumphant laugh. "I want to see your face when you fail." The statement landed heavily. Several reporters leaned forward, pens moving quickly across paper. My father gave a small, approving nod from his seat, while my mother pressed a tissue to the corner of her eye, her shoulders trembling slightly for emphasis. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the tension becoming almost tangible as eyes darted between our two tables. I remained completely silent at the defense table, my posture straight and my hands resting calmly on the wooden surface. Valerie had prepared me for this moment, and I followed her guidance without reaction. The words my sister had just spoken echoed off the high ceilings, but I kept my expression neutral and my breathing even. Kevin Lawson continued his presentation, calling additional points of evidence and emphasizing the urgency of protecting the supposed creditors. Logan stayed on the stand a few minutes longer, answering follow-up questions about past conversations and financial agreements. Her answers came smoothly, as if rehearsed many times. When Lawson finished that portion, Judge Harlan Reeves glanced at our table and asked whether we wished to make any immediate response before moving forward. Valerie rose briefly and requested a 15-minute recess to finalize our exhibits. The judge granted it without hesitation. During the short break, I stepped into the adjacent hallway with Valerie. She reviewed the sequence we had planned, making sure every document was ready for when our turn came. I listened closely, nodding at her points while keeping my focus sharp. The morning session had only just begun, but the public nature of the hearing meant every word carried weight far beyond the courtroom walls. We returned as the recess ended. The judge called the room back to order, and the petitioners continued presenting their side. Logan Bennett had delivered her message exactly as she intended, and I knew the local business press would carry her statements by the end of the day. I sat through the remainder of the morning without speaking once, absorbing every detail of the testimony and the reactions around me. The stage was now fully set, and the true test of the claims was still to come. After the recess, the petitioners resumed their case with renewed energy. Kevin Lawson called my sister Logan Bennett back to the stand for additional testimony. She described supposed conversations where I had allegedly promised to repay the $2.5 million once my company turned profitable. Her account was detailed and calm, painting a picture of repeated broken promises on my part. My father, James Bennett, followed her, taking the oath and repeating similar claims with added emphasis on how the unpaid debt had strained the entire family's finances over the years. Both of them spoke with conviction, citing dates and amounts that sounded precise. Logan mentioned late-night calls where I supposedly asked for more money, while my father described documents he claimed to have signed in good faith. Their stories aligned closely, creating a consistent narrative that the debt was real and long overdue. Kevin Lawson then called my sister's husband, Brandon Quinn, to testify. Brandon Quinn walked to the stand with measured steps, adjusted the microphone, and swore to tell the truth. He described how he had become involved in the family discussions about my finances, claiming he had reviewed bank records and witnessed my reluctance to honor the agreement. He stated that I had avoided direct communication for months, forcing the family to take legal action to protect their interests. His testimony added another layer of credibility to the petitioner's side, and he answered every follow-up question without hesitation. Throughout the testimony, my mother, Betty Bennett, sat in the front row of the gallery, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When Logan finished speaking, Betty let out a quiet sob that carried across the silent courtroom. She whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear that she never imagined one of her own daughters would treat the family this way. The emotional display was subtle yet effective, drawing sympathetic glances from several observers in the gallery. Valerie Hayes watched the proceedings closely, making occasional notes on her legal pad. When the petitioners finished their direct examination of Brandon Quinn, she stood and requested permission to cross-examine. The judge granted it immediately. Valerie began with a series of straightforward questions about the alleged loan documents. She asked Brandon Quinn to confirm the exact dates of the supposed transfers and whether any written agreements existed. His answers started confidently, but grew slightly more cautious as she pressed for specifics. Valerie then shifted focus and asked the first direct question about my company's current financial health. She inquired whether he had reviewed recent revenue reports from LuxStay AI, or was aware of the major hotel contracts the company had secured in the past year. Brandon Quinn hesitated for the first time, glancing toward Kevin Lawson before replying that he had not seen those documents. Valerie followed up by asking if he understood that LuxStay AI had been generating steady profits and expanding its client base across the Midwest. The question hung in the air as Brandon Quinn shifted in his seat and gave a vague response about not being involved in my day-to-day operations. The courtroom remained quiet, except for the sound of the court reporter's fingers on the keyboard. Valerie's calm, methodical questioning began to chip away at the smooth presentation the petitioners had built. She did not raise her voice or make dramatic gestures, yet each question carried weight and forced the witnesses to provide more precise answers than they had prepared for. My father and sister exchanged brief looks from their seats, but neither interrupted. Betty Bennett continued to hold her tissue, her earlier sobs now replaced by attentive silence. The momentum in the room was shifting in small but noticeable ways as Valerie continued her cross-examination. I sat beside her, listening to every exchange without speaking. The evidence my team had gathered was still to come, but the foundation was already being laid for what would follow. Valerie Hayes stood and addressed the court with a stack of organized binders. She began by presenting the current financial statements of LuxStay AI, projecting the latest quarterly revenue figures onto the large screen at the front of the courtroom. The numbers showed consistent growth, with major contracts from 3 national hotel chains contributing millions in recurring income. She highlighted the company's healthy cash flow and expanding market share in the Midwest hospitality sector. Next, Valerie introduced a series of exhibits detailing the company's successful integration projects. She walked the judge through client testimonials and performance metrics, demonstrating that LuxStay AI was not only solvent, but positioned for further expansion. The evidence painted a clear picture of a thriving technology firm rather than one burdened by massive unpaid debts. She then turned to the core of the defense. Valerie submitted copies of internal company emails and bank records that revealed a pattern of unauthorized access. She displayed messages showing how Ryan Matthews had been contacted and offered compensation in exchange for sensitive information about upcoming deals. The emails included specific instructions to flag any documents related to large hotel partnerships. Valerie pointed out the timestamps and IP addresses, linking the activity directly to external accounts. Following that, she presented wire transfer confirmations totaling $25,000, moving from an account controlled by my sister's husband Brandon Quinn to Ryan Matthews. The transaction records were clear and undisputed, showing the payments occurred shortly after Ryan accessed restricted files. Valerie asked the court to note how these actions demonstrated an attempt to manufacture evidence rather than resolve any legitimate debt. Kevin Lawson rose to object several times, arguing that the exhibits were irrelevant to the bankruptcy petition and that the defense was trying to distract from the main issue. His voice carried frustration as he tried to redirect the conversation back to the alleged loans. Each time, the judge allowed the evidence to stand but warned both sides to stay focused on the petition itself. Lawson attempted to counter by questioning the authenticity of the bank records, but his challenges lacked supporting documentation and quickly lost momentum. Valerie continued without interruption, methodically connecting the dots between the payments and the timing of the petition filing. She emphasized that the petitioners had relied on information obtained through improper means, which undermined the credibility of their entire claim. The courtroom remained attentive as she concluded her presentation of the financial health evidence and the proof of external interference. Throughout the testimony, my sister Logan Bennett maintained a confident smile from her seat, occasionally whispering to my father. She appeared unfazed by the documents being displayed, as if certain the outcome would still favor their side. My mother, Betty Bennett, sat quietly now, her earlier emotional displays replaced by careful observation. Judge Harlan Reeves listened closely, occasionally making notes on his pad. When Valerie finished her segment, he looked up and addressed the court. He stated that the evidence presented raised significant questions about the validity of the petition and announced he would take a short recess to review the materials before proceeding further. The room stirred slightly as people shifted in their seats, the weight of the new information beginning to settle. I remained at the defense table, watching the proceedings unfold with steady focus. The foundation we had built was holding, and the next phase would determine how the court viewed the entire case. The judge returned from recess and called the courtroom to order once more. He adjusted his glasses and looked straight at the petitioner's table. "Before we proceed further," he said, "I need clarification on one key point. Is LuxStay AI currently serving as the primary technology provider in the $150 million public-private partnership to upgrade smart systems for hotels throughout downtown Chicago and the greater metropolitan area?" The question cut through the room like a blade. Logan Bennett's face went completely still, her earlier confidence vanishing in an instant. Kevin Lawson opened his mouth to speak but produced no immediate words. James Bennett gripped the edge of the table while Betty Bennett's shoulders stiffened visibly. The gallery held its collective breath as the implications sank in. Valerie Hayes responded without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor. The contract was executed 3 months ago with full City Council approval. LuxStay AI has already received the first milestone payment of $12 million, and the project is on schedule with performance guarantees in place." She displayed the signed agreements and bank statements on the screen for everyone to see. The official seals and signatures from municipal authorities left no room for doubt. Judge Harlan Reeves studied the documents for a long moment before speaking again. "The court has reviewed all submitted evidence. The petitioners have failed to establish a legitimate debt. Moreover, the manner in which information was obtained raises serious concerns about bad faith and potential violations of corporate privacy laws." The involuntary bankruptcy petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice. All court costs and attorney fees shall be paid by the petitioners. This matter is referred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for review of possible fraud and improper procurement of confidential business data. A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. Reporters stood quickly and headed for the exits to file their stories. Logan Bennett remained frozen in her seat, staring at the judge as if the words had not yet registered. James Bennett tried to stand and speak, but the judge had already closed the file and moved on to the next case. Security personnel quietly escorted the petitioner's group toward a side exit while Valerie and I gathered our materials. Outside in the marble hallway, the winter light streamed through tall windows. A few industry colleagues who had attended offered brief words of congratulations. I thanked them politely, but kept moving. Valerie walked beside me to the elevators. "It's over," she said simply. They overreached, and the court saw it clearly. That afternoon, the news spread quickly across Chicago business networks. Local outlets reported the dramatic dismissal and the FBI referral. By the end of the week, state licensing boards had opened investigations into James Bennett's real estate development activities. His professional licenses were suspended pending review, effectively halting several ongoing projects. Logan Bennett and Brandon Quinn faced mounting personal financial pressure as their joint ventures came under scrutiny, leading to their own bankruptcy filings within months. Betty Bennett found her social standing diminished as former acquaintances distanced themselves from the public embarrassment. I made my decision final that same evening. There would be no further contact with my parents or my sister. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain or reconcile. The betrayal had been too deliberate and too public to allow any path back. The only family member I continued to see was Grandma Alice. We met quietly at her favorite cafe the following weekend. She listened to the full account without judgment, then simply took my hand and told me I had done what was necessary to protect my future. With the legal battle behind me, I turned my attention to something positive. Using a portion of the project funds, I created the Bennett Family Independence Fund. The nonprofit provides grants, legal guidance, and mentorship to young professionals seeking to break free from toxic family environments. Applications began arriving within weeks, stories of sibling rivalry, parental control, and financial sabotage that mirrored elements of my own experience. Each approved case reinforced the value of the fund. The entire ordeal carried one unmistakable lesson: family ties formed by blood do not guarantee loyalty, honesty, or support. When those closest to you choose jealousy and destruction over encouragement, the wisest response is to step away completely and build your life with those who genuinely wish you success. True strength comes from self-reliance and the courage to protect your own peace. I returned to LuxStay AI the next Monday with renewed focus. The company continued its growth on the smart hotel project, and I led the team with a clearer sense of purpose than ever before. The past no longer held power over the future I was determined to create.